The morning of my wedding to Frank Sinatra, I got a letter from a woman saying he was sleeping with her. Not a rumor, a letter with details, dated, specific, the kind of letter a woman writes when she has decided she has nothing left to lose and wants you to know exactly what you're walking into. I married him anyway, 6 hours later. Look, I was never going to pretend I was surprised. Frank was Frank. He'd been married to Nancy Barbado for 12 years and cheating on her for most of them. And I'd been one of the women he was cheating with. And I knew this going in. When you're in love with Frank Sinatra, you make decisions that don't hold up well under examination. Here's what the press said about us: that I was the destroyer, the femme fatale who wrecked Frank's first marriage, derailed his career, and walked away when things got hard. That version was very convenient for a lot of people. Here's what actually happened. Frank was broke, fired from MGM, dropped by his record label, and couldn't get arrested in Hollywood when I married him. I was MGM's most valuable star. I used my connections to resurrect his career. He thanked me by attempting to end his life 3 times, sleeping with Lana Turner to make me jealous, and throwing a douchebag full of water at me on my own porch. He was fascinating. He could be mean. He was wonderful. And he was never, ever boring. And he was the love of my life. God help me. I grew up in Grabtown, North Carolina, on Christmas Eve, 1922. Tobacco sharecroppers. 7 children. My accent was as Tar Heel as it gets, incomprehensible to anyone who lives more than 2 whoops and a holler outside the state. My mother once told me, when I complained about the way the longshoremen smelled, "That's what money smells like, honey. You still want to be rich?" I ended up at MGM by accident. My sister's husband displayed a photograph of me in his photography studio window on 5th Avenue. An MGM office boy called pretending to be a talent agent to get my number, and somehow that chain of accidents landed me a 7-year contract. My screen test was so bad that the director clapped his hands and announced, "She can't talk." They signed me anyway because of my face, which was doing a job my mouth apparently could not. I learned to act in public, over 20 years of films, most of them not good enough for what I eventually became. I did a lot of hokey pictures when I was starting out, good and bad, mostly bad. When the material was right, though, I could do something real. The Killers in 1946 was the first time anyone looked at me and saw an actress instead of a face. Mogambo, The Barefoot Contessa, The Sun Also Rises. I got better as I got older, which is the correct direction and which Hollywood never entirely forgave me for. I married Mickey Rooney when I was 19 because he asked, and I was young and hadn't learned yet what agreeing to things meant. Mickey was charming and energetic and completely impossible. I called him and Artie Shaw, my second husband, my starter husbands. Mickey was a boy. Artie was a brain who used language like a scalpel and called it conversation. Frank was all man, trouble, but all man. The first time I met Frank, I was with Mickey in the MGM commissary. Frank came over to our table. He was the biggest singer in America. He was married. He said to me, "If I had seen you first, honey, I'd have married you myself." I paid no attention. I knew he was married. I also noticed, and I'm being honest here, that he reeked of sex. A cocky god, I said later. That's what he was. 7 years later, I married him. Some things are inevitable no matter how clearly you see them coming. Frank was flat broke when we married in November 1951. He said so himself to Vanity Fair. Flat broke. MGM had terminated his contract. Columbia Records had dropped him. The voice had developed nodes, and he'd hemorrhaged on stage at the Copa, and the voice came back thinner, and the Bobby Soxers had moved on. He was hanging on to his Palm Springs house by the skin of his teeth. The press covered our relationship as scandal. Frank abandoning his wife and 3 children for the sex symbol. Hedda Hopper and Luella Parsons condemned us in every column. The Catholic Church condemned us from the pulpit. His conservative fan base sent hate mail to both of us. Ava Gardner was a homewrecker, a Jezebel, a woman who had destroyed the chairman of the board. Nobody printed the part where I saved him. In 1952, Frank was desperate for the role of Maggio in From Here to Eternity. A scrappy, doomed private who gets beaten to death in a military stockade. $150 a week for 8 days of work. Frank would have paid them. He had read the book and he knew Maggio was him. Harry Cohn, the head of Columbia Pictures who was producing the film, was famously brutal about casting decisions and famously unimpressed with the current state of Frank Sinatra's career. I went to Joan Cohn, Harry's wife. I made my case. Joan went to Harry. Harry gave Frank the screen test. There's another version of the story. Frank's people claim he went directly to Harry Cohn himself and negotiated the role through sheer force of will. The Godfather mythology, the horse's head, the mob connection, Harry Cohn capitulating under pressure. That version makes a better movie. The actual version involves Frank's wife making a phone call to the right woman. Frank flew from Africa to Hollywood, tested, got the part, came back triumphant. He won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor in 1954. The comeback that everyone credits to Frank's talent and determination was also, in a part that history has largely erased, a phone call I made. I also told Harry Cohn, according to a biographer, if you don't give him this role, it will destroy him. I said it sincerely. I was not using a figure of speech. Given what I had seen of Frank during our marriage, I meant every word. Frank got the role. He got the Oscar. He got the comeback. I got the credit for ruining his life. Both Frank and I were high-strung people, possessive and jealous and liable to explode fast. When I lose my temper, honey, you can't find it anyplace. That's accurate. Frank was exactly the same. Early in our relationship, before we were even married, Frank and I drove through a town at night with 2.38s he kept in his car, shooting out store windows and streetlights. Just because. Just because we were drunk and in love and the world felt like it belonged to us, and nobody had told us yet what it was going to cost. That was the fun version. The other version came later. Frank reignited his old affair with Lana Turner specifically to make me jealous. This is documented. He knew it would work because Lana had also been married to Artie Shaw, my second husband, and the overlap was a specific kind of provocation only Frank would think of. First Mick, then Artie, I'd said about Lana. She beat me to both of them. Frank knew this. He used it. There was an evening at our house when Lana was visiting. Frank found a douchebag hanging in the bathroom, filled it with water, walked out to the porch where I was saying goodnight to Lana, and threw it at both of us. Esther Williams, who was there, described the scene with the careful language of a woman who had seen too much Hollywood nonsense to be entirely surprised. He found an article hanging in the bathroom, and he filled it with water and went out to the porch where Ava was saying goodnight to Lana, and he threw water from that article of usefulness known as a douchebag. The police were called, Turner and her companion left, I went after them. The rumor that spread afterward, the one Lana wrote about in her own memoir, was that I had walked in and found Frank and Lana in bed together. That was not what happened. What happened was a man threw a douchebag at his wife and her friend, and the police arrived. The rumor was worse, but the truth was plenty. Another night, I was at a performance watching Frank sing, and I became convinced he was directing a particular song at a woman in the audience. I walked out. I put my wedding ring in an envelope, left it at the stage door, and left the city. A few days after we reconciled, we had another fight. He told me, "Okay, baby, I'll get out. You can find me in Palm Springs. I'll be there with Lana Turner." That's the quote. He said it to my face. His biographer confirmed it. I am not going to tell you what I said back, because some things a lady keeps to herself, but it wasn't elegant and it involved language that had not changed much since Grabtown. The fights were like that, enormous, specific, theatrical, fueled by alcohol and jealousy, and the specific combustibility of two people who were too alike to be safe together and too in love to stop. Frank put 2 holes through his mattress to make me think he was dead. We'd had a fight. I don't remember which fight. They blurred together. He went to his room. I heard 2 loud cracks. I screamed and ran in and threw myself on his body, convinced he was gone. Ava threw herself on Frank's body and began to cry, his biographer Tara Borelli wrote. My mind sort of exploded in a great wave of panic, terror, and shocked disbelief. Then his eyes opened. He had put the holes in the mattress himself. There was a gaping hole in the mattress. He was lying on the floor, watching me cry over him. I could have strangled him with my bare hands. I did not say that as a figure of speech. The man who would become the chairman of the board, the voice, the consummate professional who showed up to recording sessions perfectly prepared and delivered takes in 1 or 2 tries that reduced engineers to tears. That man got into a fight with his wife, went to his room, made 2 holes in his own mattress, and lay on the floor waiting for her to come running. She came running. Every time. In August 1951, at the Cal Neva Lodge in Lake Tahoe, a casino hotel where Frank performed and had a financial stake, we drank champagne and had a fight, and 15 minutes later, Frank made himself dangerously ill on purpose. When I found him, I forgave him in about 25 seconds, as I said afterward. You can be sure he knew exactly what he was doing. I could have kicked him. Instead, I forgave him because it was a cry for help, because he was suffering, because when you love someone self-destructive, you tell yourself that understanding it is the same as being able to stop it. It is not the same thing. There was a second crisis weeks later at his own house. Same pattern. Fight. Frank alone in his room, me at his bedside. The third time he had a severe episode, and I was not there, and he lay in a hospital bed picturing my face, and I never showed up. He had announced his separation from me by then, and I was in Madrid with a bullfighter, and he lay in that hospital bed alone. He granted me the divorce in 1957. I am not going to tell you I felt nothing about any of this. I felt all of it. In 1953, Frank came to visit me in Africa on the Mogambo set. We were in the bush in Kenya, John Ford directing, Clark Gable co-starring, the kind of production that only happened when Hollywood still threw money at the world and expected the world to be grateful. I told Frank I was pregnant. He was ecstatic. That is the honest word. For a few days, we were the version of us I always wanted us to be. Happy, in love, building towards something real. Frank wanted that baby with everything he had. MGM had all sorts of penalty clauses about their stars having babies, as I wrote in my autobiography. That was true, but that wasn't the reason. The reason was simpler and harder to say. I looked at what we were, Frank and I thought about bringing a child into it, and I couldn't do it. 3 breakdown episodes. The holes in the mattress, the personal item on the porch, the Lana Turner threat, the fights the police had been called to. I loved Frank. I also knew what our marriage was. Those 2 things were both true at the same time. I flew from Africa to London without telling him. I had the procedure. I came home. When he found out, he had another severe episode. He pictured my green eyes watching over him when he woke up in the hospital bed. I never showed up. That detail is in the biography, and I've never disputed it because it's true. I didn't show up. I'd made my decision, and I wasn't going to unmake it by sitting at his bedside and letting him turn it into something I owed him. This was not the first pregnancy. There had been one earlier, also ended before its time. He hadn't known about that one at all until later. When he found out about the second one, that was reportedly the last straw. We announced our separation in October 1953. He filed for divorce in 1954. It wasn't final until 1957 because he kept hoping I'd change my mind. I rented a house in Palm Springs and sat there and suffered for a couple of weeks after the separation became public. I sober up immediately when there is genuine bad news in my life. I never face it with alcohol in my brain. I just suffered there until I was strong enough to face it. Then I went to Madrid and started an affair with Luis Miguel Dominguin, the most famous bullfighter in Spain, because that is how I processed grief, which is probably not the recommended method, but was distinctly mine. I really suffered with all three of my husbands. I said that. I tried damn hard with all three, starting each marriage certain it would last until I died. None of them lasted more than a year or two. With Frank, it was different from the start. I'd known it would be different from the moment he said, "If I had seen you first, honey, in the MGM commissary." Some things announced themselves. He announced himself. He sent me a telegram every single day we were together, no matter where in the world I was. Every single day. Our phone bills were astronomical. The letters he wrote me when I found them after his death could have filled a suitcase. He wrote to me as Lavinia, my middle name, the name he used privately. To Lavinia, who is truly my beloved. He was desperate for companionship and love. Can you wonder that he always had mine? He was also the most jealous man I ever encountered, and I had encountered some jealous men. When I was filming Magambo in Africa, there was nothing for Frank to do while I worked, and the nothing drove him insane. He'd had an affair with Lana Turner before me, and he never let me forget it. He used it as a weapon in every fight we ever had. I used the bullfighter as a weapon after we separated. We were equally matched in our capacity for cruelty when we were wounded, which was most of the time. I think the most vulgar thing about Hollywood is the way it believes its own gossip. I said that. I meant it specifically about us. The gossip was that I was the difficult one, the promiscuous one, the one who brought chaos into Frank's life and left when the chaos got inconvenient. The truth was that I defended myself, physically, from men who needed to be physically resisted. Howard Hughes, Frank, Artie Shaw in his own way. The truth was that I had affairs, yes, but so did Frank, aggressively and provocatively, and specifically designed to wound me. The truth was that I made decisions about my own body that Frank did not agree with, and that those decisions cost me a marriage I would have kept if it had been survivable. Maybe in the final analysis, they saw me as something I wasn't, and I tried to turn them into something they could never be. I said that in my memoir. I loved them all, but maybe I never understood any of them. I don't think they understood me. With Frank, it was more specific. We understood each other too well. We were the same wound, the same insecurity, the same terror of being alone dressed up as confidence. Two people that similar should never marry. They're better as a permanent fact of each other's lives, which is what we eventually became. In 1957, Frank recorded an album called Where Are You? It is one of the saddest albums ever made. Strings and horn and Frank's voice in the low register, working through a collection of standards about loss and longing and the specific grief of loving someone who is gone. The album is devastating in the way only things made from genuine feeling are devastating. He wasn't performing loss, he was feeling it. He'd been feeling it since 1953. Everything that happened after our separation, the career peak, the Rat Pack, the Capitol Records albums that made him immortal, the Oscar, all of it was built on a foundation of Frank missing me. His biographers have written about this. His friends have confirmed it. The work he did in those years had a quality it hadn't had before, a depth that came from somewhere real, and the somewhere real was me. Meanwhile, I was in Spain, and then in London, and then wherever the next film was, living my life with the specific freedom of a woman who has stopped trying to be something a marriage could contain. I got an Oscar nomination for Mogambo. I was nominated again for On the Beach in 1959. The Barefoot Contessa, The Sun Also Rises. The best work of my career happened in the years after Frank, which tells you something about what staying in that marriage would have cost me professionally, even if I had survived it personally. The press continued to cover me as the villain. Hedda Hopper and Luella Parsons had decided what the story was, and they were not revising it. Ava Gardner was the woman who had ruined Frank Sinatra. The fact that he won an Oscar after our divorce, that his career was more successful after me than before me, that the albums he made mourning me were the ones that made him a legend, none of that fit the narrative. The narrative ignored it. Don't think for a minute that bad publicity and endless criticism don't leave their claw marks on everyone concerned, I wrote in my memoir. Your friends try to cheer you up by saying lightly, I suppose you get used to it and ignore it. You try damned hard, but you never get used to it. It always wounds and hurts. I wrote that about all of it, about being called a homewrecker, a Jezebel, a destroyer. I wrote it in the quiet of my London apartment, decades later, with the flowers Frank had sent for my birthday still on the dresser. The claw marks and the flowers, both real. We stayed close. That is the part the mythology of us as a disaster doesn't account for. After the divorce, we remained friends, remained in contact, remained in love in the specific way that people remain in love when the love is real, but the marriage was impossible. In 1959, while I was filming On the Beach in Australia, Frank flew 6,000 miles to spend 2 nights with me. What's 6,000 miles when you're still in love? The press were thick as flies on the beach, but we had our ways of being private, and with only 2 nights, we didn't even have time to fight. He sent flowers on my birthday every year without exception. Every year, a bouquet arrived. When the flowers faded, I left them on the dresser until the next birthday bouquet arrived. My sister Boppy confirmed this years later. The dried flowers and the fresh flowers, year after year, on the same dresser in the same London apartment. He remarried twice after me, Mia Farrow, Barbara Marx. He was not good at being alone, which was one of the things I understood about him that he never quite understood about himself. The marriages were not what we were. They were Frank trying to solve the problem of needing someone by finding a someone, which is the wrong solution, but a very human one. I said once that maybe I loved all my husbands, but never understood any of them, and they never understood me. With Frank, it was the opposite problem. I understood him too well, and he understood me too well, and what we understood about each other was that we were the same. Both insecure, both terrified of being alone, both most alive when things were most dangerous. He was the best singer in the world and a wonderful, charming, sexy bum. I said that. Both halves equally true. You didn't get one without the other. In 1986, I had a stroke. Frank wanted to pay for my treatment, a specialist in the United States, a medically staffed private plane. I let him make the arrangements. That was Frank. 20 years after our divorce, after all of it, he was still the person I called when something went wrong, and he still came. We had that. Whatever we didn't have, we had that. I died on January 25th, 1990, in my apartment in London. Bronchopneumonia. I was 67 years old. I had been living in London for years. I loved London, loved the English, loved being able to walk down a street without anyone much caring who I was. What's the point? My face, shall we say, looks lived in. I said that in my later years. I meant it without self-pity. The face had been through something. I didn't need it to pretend otherwise. I had asked Peter Evans to ghostwrite my memoir. I either write the book or sell the jewels, I told him. We worked on it for years. Then I found out Evans had once been sued by Frank, and I stopped the project because some loyalties don't dissolve even when the marriage is over for 30 years. After I died, with permission from my estate, Evans compiled the transcripts. He had a heart attack before he could finish. Ava Gardner, The Secret Conversations, was published from what he left behind. Frank did not come to the funeral. He was concerned about a media frenzy, and he was right. The press would have made it about him. But he sent flowers. An enormous arrangement, extravagant, the kind of flowers you send when words are insufficient. The note said, "All my love, Francis." A fan retrieved a sprig of eucalyptus from that arrangement and gave it to my sister. It is now in the Ava Gardner Museum in Smithfield, North Carolina, where I was born on Christmas Eve, 1922. The eucalyptus from Frank Sinatra's funeral flowers, preserved in a museum in the tobacco town where I grew up. He died in 1998, 8 years after me. They put me in the museum and him in the history books, and neither accounting is entirely right or entirely wrong. The press said I was the destroyer. I saved his career with a phone call, and he won an Oscar. He tried to end his life 3 times while we were married, and I sat at his bedside each time. I made 2 decisions about my own body, and he had a severe episode over one of them. He sent me flowers on every birthday until I died. I left the dried flowers on the dresser until the fresh ones arrived. That's the whole story, not the gossip version, the actual one. You tell me who destroyed whom. Hollywood believes its own gossip. I said that once as a diagnosis of everything wrong with the industry, and it applied to us specifically and permanently. The gossip said I was the difficult one, the promiscuous one, the chaos that disrupted the great career, the woman from Grabtown who didn't know her place and burned through 3 marriages and left wreckage wherever she went. The truth was that I arrived at MGM unable to speak and became one of the finest actresses of the 1950s through 20 years of work. The truth was that I married Frank Sinatra when he was broke and unemployed and made a phone call that put him in the room that changed everything. The truth was that I defended myself from men who needed to be defended against, made decisions about my own body that were mine to make, and loved someone for the rest of my life who was not good for me and whom I was not entirely good for either. Both Frank and I were high-strung people, possessive and jealous and liable to explode fast. That's the accurate sentence. Both of us, not just me. If I had my life to live over again, I'd live it the same way. Maybe a few changes here or there, but nothing special. The truth is, honey, I've enjoyed my life. I've had a hell of a good time. I said that at the end, and I meant it, and I want you to hear it as what it was. Not bravado, not performance, just the honest assessment of a woman who started in Grabtown and ended in London and had Frank Sinatra send eucalyptus to her funeral. The best singer in the world, a wonderful, charming, sexy bum. Mine. Even after everything. Mine.